Tokyo should not exist. At least not anywhere close to how it does right now. That sounds absurd because modern Tokyo feels permanent. It feels inevitable. It is a sprawling, neon-soaked hyperstructure of 37 million people moving with the surgical precision of a Swiss watch. The trains arrive down to the second. Towers pierce the clouds. Entire districts look like they were built 50 years in the future. Millions of citizens collide every single day, yet chaos never swallows the streets. It consistently ranks as one of the safest, wealthiest, and most functional megacities on Earth. But none of this was guaranteed, because less than a century ago, Tokyo was a smoking graveyard. It didn't just decline, it was systematically wiped off the map. Twice. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake ripped the earth open beneath the capital. Within minutes, tightly packed wooden neighborhoods collapsed. Fires swept through the debris like a tidal wave. Over 100,000 people died in a matter of hours. The capital of Japan was reduced to a wasteland of ash so absolute that survivors genuinely believed they were witnessing the end of the world. Then, just as the city began to scrape itself out of the dirt, World War II arrived. And this time, the destruction was engineered by man. In 1945, American firebombing campaigns targeted Tokyo with ruthless efficiency. Industrial zones and residential blocks vanished overnight under a rain of napalm. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were vaporized or left homeless. Factories were flattened. Infrastructure was vaporized. The economy was completely shattered. By the time Japan signed the surrender documents on the deck of the USS Missouri, Tokyo looked less like a future global superpower and more like a twisted monument to concrete and bone. Most civilizations do not recover from trauma on this scale. Some never recover at all. But Tokyo did something unnatural. It didn't just rebuild the old city. It weaponized the clean slate. It engineered an entirely different beast. Larger, richer, faster, and infinitely more powerful. Within a few decades, this resource-starved island capital became the financial envy of the Western world. It didn't happen because Japan discovered oil. It didn't happen because they expanded their borders. And it certainly didn't happen by accident. Tokyo became rich because Japan mastered a single discipline better than anyone else in history: adaptation under extreme pressure. When you strip away the neon and the concrete, Tokyo's rise was never actually about buildings. It was about systems. Tokyo turned organization into a geopolitical weapon. The city grew rich because its architects learned how to compress maximum economic efficiency into every single square inch of human activity, from transit and housing to manufacturing, retail, and finance. For a brief moment in the late 20th century, the system worked so perfectly that the West genuinely believed Japan was going to buy the future. By the 1980s, Tokyo was the epicenter of the greatest economic explosion modern history had ever seen. Corporate titans like Sony, Panasonic, Toshiba, Toyota, Nikon, Canon, and Honda weren't just successful businesses. They were symbols of a nation that had rebuilt itself faster than anyone thought mathematically possible. Western executives panicked. Hollywood started producing movies where Japanese corporations owned America. Books were published questioning whether Washington could ever compete with the sheer velocity of Tokyo's economic machine. Capital flooded the city at insane, intoxicating levels. Real estate speculation became detached from gravity. At the absolute peak of the frenzy, the land beneath the Tokyo Imperial Palace, a mere 1.1 square kilometers, was estimated to be worth more than the entire state of California. Let that settle in. One single property in central Tokyo held more theoretical value than the largest, richest economic engine in the United States. It was a financial hallucination. But to understand how Tokyo reached that terrifying peak, you have to look at the foundational trap Japan had to escape first. How do you build an empire when you have absolutely nothing? By the way, if you're enjoying this breakdown and made it this far, hit subscribe and drop a like on the video. It helps the channel out a lot, and it keeps you ahead of the curve. Alright, let's get back to the video. Geographically, Japan is an economic nightmare. The terrain is aggressively mountainous, leaving very little flat land for agriculture or urban expansion. Natural resources are virtually non-existent. The country has to import almost every drop of fuel and raw material it consumes. To top it off, it sits directly on the ring of fire, meaning earthquakes are a constant, unpredictable threat to infrastructure. Tokyo is overcrowded today simply because the country lacks the physical space to expand outward. Yet, this geographic cage became Tokyo's ultimate advantage. Scarcity forced efficiency. When land is a luxury, you don't build wide, you build smart. When resources are scarce, your industries become pathologically obsessed with precision, waste reduction, and miniaturization. When your city is routinely leveled by natural disasters and warfare, your society develops a psychological muscle memory for rapid reconstruction. Tokyo didn't succeed despite the pressure. It evolved because of it. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, a period historians call the Japanese economic miracle, the city became the beating heart of an industrial rebirth. But while American factories prioritized mass production and raw scale, Tokyo's boardroom kings obsessed over optimization. They made things smaller, lighter, more reliable, and radically more efficient. The Sony Walkman changed how the world consumed media. Toyota redefined the global gold standard for manufacturing logistics. Nintendo reshaped global entertainment culture. Japanese cameras dominated global photography. Tokyo wasn't just exporting physical products. It was exporting a high-tech lifestyle. The city itself became the ultimate luxury brand. By the 1990s, Tokyo looked like a sci-fi film brought to life. Bullet trains sliced through the cityscape. High-tech arcades and multi-story electronics markets buzzed with current. Vending machines lined every alleyway. It gave the distinct impression that Japan had broken the space-time continuum and left the rest of the planet 20 years behind. But underneath the blinding lights, a financial time bomb was ticking. Wealth becomes highly dangerous the moment people start believing the upward line will never curve down. That is exactly where Tokyo lost its mind. During the late 1980s, the asset bubble crossed into pure madness. Real estate speculation became completely decoupled from economic utility. Investors borrowed billions of yen recklessly because the banks operating out of Marunouchi assumed property values were physically incapable of dropping. Businesses bought up real estate portfolios at hyperinflated prices, operating on the sole assumption that a greater fool would buy them out next month for a premium. It was an economic fever dream. Micro-apartments sold for astronomical fortunes. Corporate office blocks became speculative poker chips. The exterior of the machine looked flawless, but internally, the gears were grinding to dust under the weight of bad debt. And then the bubble burst. The crash hit Japan like a psychological earthquake. Real estate values cratered. The stock market tanked. Conglomerates that had expanded on a mountain of cheap credit found themselves buried alive in debt. Confidence, the very fuel of the economic miracle, evaporated overnight. Japan entered the lost decades. A brutal, prolonged era of economic stagnation where the frantic growth of the post-war era ground to a sudden halt. This is the exact point where Tokyo's story deviates from almost every other boomtown in history. Many cities can ride a massive economic wave when the cash is flowing freely. Very few can survive the total evaporation of that cash and remain globally dominant. Tokyo didn't hollow out like the American Rust Belt. It adapted yet again. The city abandoned the pursuit of reckless, speculative expansion and turned inward. It doubled down on stability, infrastructure, public safety, and long-term urban functionality. Tokyo realized that if it could no longer be the fastest-growing city on Earth, it would become the most functional city on Earth. The sheer design of Tokyo's transit network explains more about its modern wealth than any GDP metric ever could. In the matrix of global economics, transit determines economic gravity. If millions of workers can move across an urban expanse without friction, human productivity scales exponentially. Businesses move faster. Workers waste zero time stuck in traffic grids. Commerce becomes hyperdense. Entire districts fuse into a single, massive economic ecosystem. Tokyo perfected this spatial choreography. Its rail network is so vast, rapid, and predictable that owning a car in the city center is practically an act of financial masochism. Trains arrive with errors measured in seconds, not minutes. Stations aren't just transit stops. They are subterranean fortresses integrated directly into skyscrapers, shopping complexes, and residential zones. Because space is a premium, density became an asset rather than a curse. In the West, extreme urban density usually breeds crime, decay, and administrative collapse. In Tokyo, density was treated as a mathematical formula. Convenience stores operate with automated, real-time logistical precision, swapping inventory multiple times a day to match foot traffic. Micro-restaurants thrive because the flow of commuters past their doors never stops. Retail sectors remain intensely profitable late into the night because the trains keep moving people safely. Even the millions of vending machines scattered across the city serve a purpose. They monetize tiny, useless gaps of real estate that would otherwise produce zero yield. Tokyo successfully financialized order itself. But there is a secondary engine driving Tokyo's modern capital that Western analysts frequently miss: the monetization of culture. Japan didn't just export microchips and sedans. They exported a distinct psychological aesthetic. Anime, gaming, fashion, architectural design, streetwear, and culinary mastery. Tokyo quietly transformed into one of the most potent cultural exporters on the planet. Neighborhoods like Shibuya, Akihabara, Harajuku, and Ginza stopped being mere coordinates on a map and became global concept brands. Japanese design principles, minimalist, precise, intentional, began dictating Western entertainment, branding, and internet subcultures. Tourists stopped flying into Haneda merely to see historical temples. They came because the modern city itself had become the premier consumer experience. And in the 21st century economy, capturing global attention is just as lucrative as capturing raw materials. The fascinating thing about Tokyo's massive wealth is that it doesn't boast. It doesn't scream for attention the way Dubai or Los Angeles does. Tokyo's affluence is silent. It is deeply embedded within the architecture of its daily routines, rather than displayed in vulgar spectacles of luxury. You see it in the spotless streets, the absolute reliability of the power grid, the total lack of urban decay, the fact that a child can walk home alone at midnight through a metropolis of millions without a shred of fear. Tokyo's true power is its unmatched consistency. Building consistency at this scale is arguably the hardest feat in human engineering. Usually, when an urban area grows this large, the cracks begin to show. The mass transit systems break down under funding deficits. Crime rates tick upward. Infrastructure rots. Bureaucracy paralyzes development. Yet, Tokyo keeps running, day after day, with an efficiency that feels almost unnatural. The city isn't flawless. Japan is currently staring down a brutal demographic cliff. The population is aging rapidly, birth rates are near historic lows, and the corporate work culture has historically driven citizens to the brink of exhaustion. The explosive economic momentum of the 1980s is gone, replaced by a slower, more cautious reality. The younger generation is increasingly pushes back against the rigid, conformist systems that built the post-war miracle. Yet, despite the demographic weight pulling at its heels, Tokyo remains an immovable pillar of the global economy. Because the city didn't just build wealth, it built resilience. Tokyo was flattened by nature. It was incinerated by war. It was choked by financial ruin. It was strangled by a complete lack of natural resources. Every single time history handed the city an existential death sentence, it simply reorganized its layout, updated its code, and evolved. That is why the city commands the wealth it does today. Not because the world was kind to it, but because the world wasn't. The geography forced the system to become flawless or perish. When you watch Tokyo from a skyscraper at night, a sea of endless light, packed trains sliding between neon towers, and millions of lives moving in perfect sync, you aren't just looking at a wealthy city. You are looking at the ultimate monument to human reconstruction. A system that took every single limitation history could throw at it and turned those limitations into absolute power. The hustle is over. The system just works. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. We'll see you in the next one.